And good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here with another episode of UFO News Network Sunday. We're ready to go with a big panel to talk about more of what we talked about last week, gear that everybody can use to help them gather data on any possible UFO sightings that we might have. So let's not waste any time. Let's bring on our guest panel for today. Great panel we've got. And to do that, I'm going to bring on my co-host and the real reason that aliens won't talk to us, the one and only Chant Hanna. How you doing today, Chant?
Thank you for that fabulous introduction. We
I knew
do
you'd
have a
love it.
great show. This is a part two to equipment tools, apps, and skill sets used to procure possible UAP activity. The first person I'd like to introduce onto the show is Rich Hoffman. I don't know how anybody can't know who Rich Hoffman is, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce him. And he is on the board of the SCU, which is the Scientific Coalition for UAPs. He has a BA in organizational communications from Wright State University. He is an information technology consultant and strategist. He has been a defense contractor for over 20 years, working primarily for the Army Materiel Command HQ with a variety of companies. Currently, Mr. Hoffman is an enterprise architect working at Redstone Arsenal and the Marshall Space Flight Center in over 54 years experience in investigations, a research on the research of the UFO topic. And Mr. Hoffman has served as Director of Investigations, Star Team Manager, and Director of Strategic Projects, as well as State Director in MUFON and other organizations. We have Earl Gray. He actually has quite a long bio, but he sent me along just a few short sentences, and that is he is MUFON's Chief Investigator and Assistant State Director in Southern California, as well as member of Kathleen Experiencer Region. Michael Hall. He is an icon in the realm of ufology. He is the Honorable Michael Hall, former Superior Court judge and fearless leader of the UFO I-Team. He's located in Edmonds, Washington, also known as a paranormal lawyer. He created and is head of the UFO I-Team. The UFO I-Team is a crack team of UFO researchers who are dedicated as their equipment is sophisticated, and is used in their UFO detection efforts in the field. We also have Shane Hurd, who's been on our show many times. He's an investigator for Phoenix MUFON, and he was raised and born in Spokane, Washington. He moved to AZ in 1980, and let's see. He has a technical field background regarding civil engineering, information technology, and geographic information systems for 2 decades now. He attended Arizona State University and graduated from W.P. Carey School of Business. You'll have to correct me on that, Shane, where he received a certified public manager certificate. And he also runs a staff with an annual budget of about $5 million. He is a civil government employee, and he's devoted to the topic of ufology. I'd like to welcome everybody on our show today. Thank you for being on with us. I think everybody has
Their mic muted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Earl. Hey, Shane, Michael, Rich.
I've been wondering why E.T. wasn't talking with us. What is that? My goodness.
The master of mute.
Shane, before we get started, you were out at a little event where Tom DeLonge and his co-author Peter Levenda were signing books, and there was a surprise special guest, Jim Semivan. So before we get into the gear, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, it was fun. It was for a book signing in Encinitas, California. And if you've ever seen or been to the Stars or office, it's just a very small little building. And again, it was for the release of God's Man and More, the latest book written with Peter Levenda and Tom DeLonge. And so Jason McClellan and I just drove over from Phoenix and stood in a line there maybe for an hour or two. And so there were plenty of people there. And then you walk through and you got a chance to, chat with them for a couple minutes. And in fact, before it was, formal and stuff, we were standing there and Peter Lavenda, Tom, and Jim Semovan walked in, and we were speaking with some of the folks there, and so we got a chit chat for a minute, which was really interesting. And Jim is just really one of the nicest people. He's very cordial. Same with Peter. And then when we went through the formal line, got our book signed and stuff, they were perfectly willing to chit chat with you. They asked us where we're from and who are we basically, and indicated that part of MUFON. They're like, oh, that's terrific, and they're just super nice. They were interested, they were engaged. I mean, it was really worth doing, and haven't got through the book yet, but I'm excited to do so. And yeah, it was just a cool, fun little thing to do. And I didn't realize Tom was so tall. He's like 6'4" or something.
Yeah, I've seen that, and yeah, he is a tall guy. But any hot information come about from all that?
No, just small talk and, just moving along through the line, unfortunately. But I did get one of the staff that worked there. We know her, Angela. She's a real sweetheart. Anyways, we got to tuck our head back in there and see their offices, which was kind of cool. So, and it's kind of what you see on Unidentified. Again, it's a small place, but it's very cool. I mean, it was so fun. It was just a thrill to do.
Awesome.
I wanted to bring something to our panel's attention, and that is Rich Hoffman actually offered a really wonderful series of articles. I guess he'll have to correct me on what to call them, but they're reports essentially on aids to UFO investigations. And these documents include some really fascinating applications and other things that can be used, I believe, is my understanding, the perspective I have on it, to try and detect UFO or UAP activity. Before I read any of this material, because I have 2 documents from Rich on this, Rich, can you give us a synopsis on what you think, what you can share what these documents are? One is aids to UFO investigations, and the other one is tools. And there you go.
Yeah, so the gist of it is that when I was the Deputy Director of Investigations for MUFON, and also then moved into this STAR Team Manager role, the key thing that I found was a lot of people just weren't familiar with what the capabilities of their cell phones were, and realizing that there's so many people that are out there armed with a cell phone. Why not take advantage of some of the capabilities of the cell phones now? In addition to that, I was trying to be able to get improvements in actually image, take and use the standard cell phone. Those they keep getting. At the same time, there were other camera apps allowed you to do manual kind of settings on camera, or even improve the quality of the image, which are things like, for example, if you're looking to things like Madar is putting out photometer kind of readings. There's a simple app called Teslameter, and it basically goes through and, for example, records the background radiation, micro Tesla units or milligauss, and you're able to now set the sensitivity of that and do a lot of neat things with it in terms of detecting things. Your accelerator, there's an accelerometer already built into your phone. There's a gravitometer that's also built into your phone, and a lot of those features and stuff like that are. In addition to that, there's like things like like I was mentioning about with the camera. We started to see like everyone was using their cell phones again to record. A beautiful kind of an app that's out there, which basically allows you to get a whole bunch of the GPS coordinates and various other things on it, and that's theodolite. Theodolite gives you, you just basically point theodolite crosshair app would be able to take the photograph. You could send that in. But the important thing about it, it gives me the precise time of day, the bearings, that direction that they're looking at. It gives me the angular height, and I can compute it from that. So we don't get that from a simple, you point the camera in a direct. And so using something like that is extremely important, and actually probably should be just mandatory for anybody to use if they're going to take a UFO.
So
I even mentioned this to
sorry to interrupt
Lou
you.
Elizondo.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to
All
say
right.
that I mentioned to Lou.
So, sorry to interject. You're breaking up quite
ahead.
often. So, perhaps you can call us back right now so we can hear better audio from you, because you broke up a good lot of what you said. You were breaking up. Do you think you can call back in on audio to try again?
Yeah, I just don't know how to get a hold of you on the phone, but I can try
Okay.
going back out.
I'll go ahead
again.
and call. I'll call you. I'll call you right now as soon as you
Okay.
hang. Okay.
All
All
right.
right. So while I'm working on that, I was going to ask Michael Hall, what do you and your team use in order to procure, with whatever equipment you have available to you and your team, to procure possible UFO/UAP activity? Michael?
There we go. Then we get back off of mute there. Thank you, Chant, for the question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me good?
Yeah, you're not breaking up. It seems like it was just Rich, because Shane went for a while and Chance going for a while, so it seems like it might have been on Rich's end.
Okay, super. Gosh, I'm so happy to hear that last show about the technical gear of UFO spotting and research and data gathering went so well. And I'm so glad that we have a major panel back today, because the UFO I-team has been now just astronomically upping up our game with the gear that we're using. Of course, we've always had, major, video gear that can zoom in quite ways. We can look at the craters on the moon, let's put it that way, very easily, as well as all the galaxies out there are pretty much available if you know where you're looking. But we have FLIR photography. We've got forward infrared photography that will light up the night sky like you won't believe. If you don't think you're going to see anything because of even some overcast, FLIR photography will really give you an availability that you don't normally have. We have night vision, of course, and we have time-lapse photography. We don't talk a lot about the simple idea of time-lapse photography, but that is just a fascinating use for us, because what we'll do is take a giant ambient view of the night sky with one of our video gear that is just connected to, actually it's a camera that's connected to the time-lapse, counter. And so every, maybe 30 seconds or so, or whatever we want to set it at, we will get a complete view of the night sky. Or we can set it to do every 2 minutes, we'll have a minute-long video. And then it'll turn off, and every 2 minutes again, it'll turn on again for a minute. And what we get in that regard, when we review those videos, is some amazing anomalies that we don't necessarily see. They might be very short-lived. We might not be looking in that direction, but the ambient night sky will show up a signature of some kind of a travel mode of an object that we can then, get into as far as the data and figure out if it's an anomalous object or not. And then, of course, we've got Dave Mason's amazing binoculars that will take the light frequency of stars, the ISS space station, or anomalous craft, and it will translate that into audio sound that we can also do some investigation on to see if it matches up with any known audio frequencies that are out there from from commercial airliners, for instance. Even the ISS space station or stars give a certain frequency sound off that we can, do the due diligence on as well. So we'll get into some of those real details later on, but that's generally what we've been using lately.
Jan, I can't hear you. I can see your lips moving, but
That sounds like my boyfriend talking.
okay.
I wanted to mention a really wonderful person who is on your team, Michael, and that is Dave Mason. He was on with us last show regarding this, and he's an expert on electronic equipment regarding what we're talking about. And I just wanted to mention him because he was a very important part of our last show regarding this particular topic. I wanted to actually ask Rich one more time about the apps that he was talking about. There were a few apps that he mentioned, and a few I'd like to go ahead and go over are the Theodolite, the Stellarium, the Geostat Watch, the Flight Radar 24, the Tesla meter, the iSeek thermal devices, temperature and humidity devices, and radiation detector devices. Do you mind going over that? Rich?
That's fine. Can you hear me now? Am I
Yeah,
better?
you seem a little bit better now for
Yes.
now.
All right. Well, sorry about that. I don't know what's going on, but welcome to the world of technology, right?
It's still pretty amazing, you know?
Yeah, it really is. Okay, so let me go back and just kind of like run through it again. I mentioned Theodolite. Theodolite's a very, very good app in the sense that you actually can take a photo and you can mail it right to somebody, and all the data associated with the photograph can be sent by email to any given location. And I mentioned this, by the way, to Lou Elizondo, that it would be good if you had that kind of a tool, if you're going to be building this Project Capture app that Rob Freeman built, and you're going to be adapting it to this thing called Vault that they're doing. But anyway, the point I'm trying to get at is the Theodolite, you take an image and you're able to see the angular size. You can determine the altitude. You can get the bearings from it. You can also get the GPS location. You can get the time of day. You can use trigonometry to readily determine the altitude of the object. It gives you just so much more than a photograph will give you. And a lot of people are missing the boat. They'll take a photograph on their phone, and they may not even have GPS on. And so it's difficult because we're looking at the EXIF data to be able to determine what we can about that, the settings of the camera and everything else. And so a lot of that in Theodolite is solved. The other thing that I mentioned was Tesla Meter 11. It's a nice little app in the sense that it gives you micro Tesla and milligauss kinds of readings of background radiation. So if you think about some of the things that the other systems like MADAR and some of the other ones that are being touted for as UFO tools, your phone is able to actually do that in terms of giving background, magnetic kinds of indications. The other thing that I've always pointed out was that it's good that we have true temperature settings and some other kinds of things and Geiger counters. I don't know if you're aware of it, but for the iPhone and probably for the other devices as well, you can go out and get little tools that you can add and attach to your phone through the 3.5 microphone jack or into the lightning spot there. And you're able to now get accurate temperature readings at your given location. It's also a Geiger counter. There's a little Geiger counter you can buy to attach to it. There's also I use it to be able to, when I'm investigating the Cloverdale lights, for example, to get, again, precision in terms of the time, the temperature, the humidity that's out there, because it might be a factor of humidity and more of that kind of data. And you can and capture that as well. It's also important, for you to understand, and let me give you an illustration of what I'm talking about. I had a witness that was calling me and saying that I'm looking at a particular light in the sky that I can't really figure out, and I don't know what it is. It seems to be, and I called him up and I said, okay, well, give me an address where you're at, And so I went over to use my phone, or I can't, no, I used the computer actually. And I got onto Google Earth, and I was able to now zoom in on their location. I'm seeing their complete house and the arrangement of that. And they're telling me that they're in their backyard. I now get on the phone and I'm able to go over and very quickly, while I'm still talking with them, I'm able to go over and get on flight radar, and I'm able to see the aircraft directly above them. And I say, do you see this flight heading eastbound, definitely in the direction of the object? And they said, well, I do see aircraft. And so I'm able to track the aircraft that are in the air. At the same time, I have another app where I'm able to go in and very quickly go and now look at the satellites that are directly overhead. And I can put that into a GeoSat Watch app. And I'm able to look at satellites that are moving overhead. And it's surprising to see that there's like maybe, probably about 50 to 100 of these things that are hanging over your head at any one time. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is you're very quickly able to do things like investigations by just using your phone and using some of the apps that I mentioned. And so I'm wanting, to encourage, UFO investigators, at the same time, others to be able to go into that. There are things like police radio kinds of monitoring apps that you can get, that are on your phone. There's also air traffic control. You can be listening to the local air traffic control people and get a lot of that information. So we could be leveraging our phones a bit more than we are to at least be able to get more data to be able to help us out in our UFO investigations. Realizing that, of course, there are tremendously a lot of other tools out there that are way more costly, but the general public doesn't have those. The one thing that we were looking at one point doing in MUFON, at the same time we were talking about this in other things, were to be able to get apps that will alert you to now know that if you're interested, sign up, and now you'll get alerted if there's an object that's being sighted in your area. And then we encourage you then to go outside, and now you could take and have images taken from different positions, which give you triangulation, and you can get the exact precise altitude and the position of whatever that object is. So those are some of the many tools that are out there on our phone. In fact, I'll be talking about these at the SCU conference we're going to have in next June. But again, there's excellent kinds of tools on our phone, including, by the way, I'll point out to you also thermal imaging kinds of things. You can get an iSeek kind of adapter you can put in there and now start to look at that in that context. So,
okay.
Go ahead.
I wanted to go ahead and break in. I've been sharing my screen for the last 5 minutes with our panel to show them this wonderful document you sent me, which is Aids to UFO Investigations. Mm-hmm. And that was compiled in January of 2017. It's the version 1 that I have. And it says this document is an attempt to compile the list of many resources available to support UFO investigations. Aids like these continue to become available, so this document is a living document and will be need to be kept up to date. And if you become aware of other tools and aids that should be included, Rich is asking folks to add to it. Now, it starts off with saying aircraft, the name of it, the type, the OS, I assume that's just operating system, right? And the value and the link. Can you just give us a feel for what this document is about that we're staring at, the panel's looking at?
Well, it's about the tools I just discussed. I mean, so for example, in other words, it gives you the tool, and then it gives you the type of operating system, as well as, the fact that I clumped all the aircraft related stuff together. I put there's another tab that's out there on the document that talks about satellite kind of information. Another one talks about maybe astronomy or something of that nature. And so I clumped the various tools and even websites that you can go to get information under each of those headers. And then you have the link to where you can go to learn more about the object, about the tool. So that's pretty much what I put together, and I had provided the field investigators that I was working with when I was in MUFON.
Okay. Okay. And then I wanted to go ahead and thank you very much for that synopsis, Rich. It was wonderful. We really appreciate it. I see also that we have another guest on our show that I had wanted to introduce. He's joined us now. His name is Dean Ashley, and Dean is married with 2 children, born and raised in St. Louis, graduated college with a BA in English, joined the Navy in 1996, became an aviation electronics technician, and served for a little over 4 years. He gained the rank of E5, but decided, let's see what we have here, sorry about that. Decided that the civilian world was better suited for him. Eventually, he found a job as a depot-level FLIR technician, and he has been involved in, in the same position ever since. He's worked as on a variety of FLIRs, both old and new, analog and digital. He has seen more things in the sky with FLIRs over the years with different systems that make him believe that he's somewhat of an expert in the field. He feels he's not alone, and that there's others in his... Okay, so that's it. Basically wanted to ask Dean if he wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of his experiences regarding possible detection of UAPs with the multi-million-dollar equipment he has available to him. He does have to be ambiguous about what that equipment is, but if you could still share some anecdotal experiences and maybe a little bit of your experience, your expertise regarding that equipment would be very helpful.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Dean.
Okay. A brief background is I work for a government agency as a contractor, and like you said, I utilize a lot of these infrared FLIR systems. I'm close to NAS jacks within a few miles, so I always see planes flying around. I see balloons, I see birds, other objects that you normally see in the sky. So I gotten quite used to them. So when something stands out, I see something out of the ordinary, then I first try to figure out what it is, and I usually can most of the time. But there's been once or twice where I have not been able to decide what this thing is in the air, and it's usually when they're just motionless in the sky. I don't understand it. Because, I've seen the moon, I've seen planets, I've seen that kind of thing. And there's a phone app, I think it's called Skyview or something like that, but you can see where planets are relative to where you move your iPhone around. So we use that to help us with that kind of stuff. But I've seen these stationary orbs in the sky that I just can't explain. So that's kind of where we are right now.
You got a lengthy video of one of those posted up over at your channel, I believe, on YouTube. And
yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, sure. That happened on Halloween. So it was about, I don't know, maybe 9 o'clock in the morning, somewhere around there. And a coworker came up to me and said, "Hey, you want to check this thing out in the back? I think it's a satellite." So I said, "Okay." So we went and looked, and I recorded this thing for 45 minutes. And it was like I said earlier, relatively motionless, and it kind of moved with the Earth's rotation, but it didn't seem to move at all. It just seemed to move because the Earth moves and, things, I don't know, it just seemed stationary. So I was trying to figure out it was a satellite, but I could see light glinting off of it, and it was already morning time. So I thought that would be obscured or I'm not sure. It just seemed way too big to be a satellite. And I could see it in the infrared, the shortwave infrared, and the daylight cameras.
And that time of day, I think the immediate things that pops into my mind is, was it possibly Venus? Were you able to rule out Venus as a possibility?
Yeah, that's the first thing I did, because it did look a lot like Venus. We were looking to the west, and at that particular time, Venus was to the east, so it was behind us.
Okay, thank you very much, Dean. We will be getting back to Rich and Dean later, including Michael, but I wanted to also ask Shane and Earl a few questions. I'll start off with Earl. Earl, you've been involved in the investigations of possible UFO activity for many years, and I know you've done quite a few investigations. Do you feel you have come across real UFO activity, so to speak? I'm sure you can expound upon that.
Oh,
And
yeah,
also,
yes.
could you please tell us what kinds of equipment you feel would be appropriate to using to try and procure possible UAP activity?
Sure. Well, as Rich Hoffman was mentioning earlier, the Theodolite app is essential. If you're doing, if I go and I do a field investigation and it's after the fact, I'll still, like just recently, I had a family that saw a fleet of UFOs. And, the old image specialist from JPL, Marion Rudnick, also saw a fleet of UFOs in the same general area. So I took it very seriously, especially because the mother had an aerospace background, and her father had worked at Lockheed Skunk Works, of all places, of course. Synchronicity being what it is, and this field, and some of the strangeness that we come across. Things seem to be connected at times, and you have to kind of follow that. But as usual, I went out to their backyard where they had this sighting. Their sighting lasted about 25 seconds, where there was a cloud bank, almost like a theater of observation, where there was a cloud bank towards the west and a cloud bank to the east, and they saw this group of cupolid discs flying across. They came out of one side of the clouds. It was in the early evening, so they actually saw them light up the clouds as they emerged. They went across the sky, and they disappeared into the next cloud bank, which they also lit up. Both were plane spotters, or well aware of, they live near the Van Nuys Airport. They're used to seeing experimental craft, and this was something completely different, and the whole family saw this. There was a young preteen son who saw it, the father, the mother, and then the daughter, who was in her late 20s. But I went out and I got theodolite photos of where they saw the UFOs emerge from initially. I got the coordinates and everything of where they disappeared into in the next cloud bank. And it was really helpful. It gave me really the exact area of the sky that these were in. They were able to, guesstimate pretty accurately how close these were. So I do use the Theodolite app. Other things that I've used, there's an astrophysicist from France. His name is Jean-Pierre Petit. And we had him speak to our MUFON Los Angeles group about a little over a year ago. And he has a little gizmo that you can attach physically to your iPhone camera. It's just very small. It's maybe a couple of millimeters across, and it just fits right over the lens. And it's got a little spectral. It works as a little miniature spectroscope. And so you could actually flip the little lens in and out so that it's not there all the time. So if you're taking selfies or something, you're not going to show up in rainbow hue, right? Because that's what it would do, if you just take a photo with it. But if you point that at any object of light, it will give you the spectrum. You'll get a color for various spectra of an object. So you can tell a planet from a jet contrail, from a UFO, and it's very helpful. And he wrote a paper about this. It's called What Information Can Be Obtained from a UFO Observation, and you can find that at jp-petit, PETIT.org. And he's got a few papers up there, but that one will pop right up. Or you could just Google, iPhone device for capturing spectra of UFOs, and JP Petit, and that will pop up. But it's jp-petit.org. Another app that I've used that I've found very, very helpful, and I've only really had one or two situations where I've been able to use it, but it was very helpful, is I have a hunter's tracking app. It's called JPS Tracks. And again, you can get this over at the Apple, App Store. I think it cost me $5 max. And what it'll do is that I had one case in particular that was in Azusa, California, where two women took chase after two UFOs. And I was able to get the flight pattern exact because they were chasing these in their car. It was actually chosen as one of MUFON's best cases of 2017. So it was a couple of years ago. But I used the Hunters app, and I was to get the exact coordinates of where they went, where they turned to follow these objects. And so that's another thing that you can use. If somebody has an entity sighting and they were actually, where it wasn't, directly in their room or something like that, you could use it for that. And so sometimes I sort of misappropriate apps that are for one thing and use them for ufology. And it you just have to kind of keep an open mind and think about stuff and how you can use something like a Hunter's app for our purposes.
I'm going to go to Shane now, Earl, but I will be asking you to engage with us on discussion along with our entire panel about the difference between drones and non-drones. I'm just going to put it like that, because I know you've had quite a few experiences with folks who feel like they had seen a real UFO, so to speak, meaning a possible ET-related incident when really it was a drone. So we'll get back to you on that. But meanwhile, Shane, I was going to ask you, you're an investigator for the MUFON Phoenix chapter, and I wanted to know what experiences you feel are key regarding sharing possible equipment, tools, apps, or skill sets to discern a possible UFO activity.
Yeah, sure. Glad to. In fact, we just completed the second annual MUFON Investigators Boot Camp here in Arizona, and I had a couple presentations regarding investigation, and one of them was about tools and resources. However, it's a slightly different angle. It's typically what we apply after the fact, right, to investigate a case. So it's not preemptive or during an actual sighting, and I'm fully supportive and agree with the tools that we've already been talking about for that. Certainly a theodolite, that's huge. That's really one of the main things that you can use. I also have like a planes live app, again, very similar aviation. You can tell what that plane is above you, its flight number. They even give you a picture of the plane, where it originated, where it's going, its altitude, its speed, its heading. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. So, but something like that is a tool to rule out something, as opposed to verifying what something is and a true unknown. But some of the tools and stuff that I utilized really in the investigative process is much like Rich's document that you showed us earlier. And, it's the type of the tool name, and then where you can find that. But, some of the categories of tools we use are, we check other UFO reporting agencies such as NUFORT. And the idea behind that is if you can correlate a report with another report, especially with someone who's in a different location and unknown to the person who's reporting it to you, then, that adds a lot of credibility and weight to the report. Plus, hopefully, you can glean additional data. We always check like local media, and so all of the television stations and the newspapers, and again, looking for additional reports and different, facts. And then, of course, always try and contact the military bases around and find out, is there training activity going on and that sort of thing. And, it's kind of a 50-50 chance that you'll get a straight answer there. Some people have better resources than others, but it's worth a shot, right? You try and turn over every stone. And then same with like local law enforcement. And I have pretty good support there. I've always been able to get somebody to provide some information, even if it is, no, we don't have anything, but it's believable.
So Shane, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to mention something that you have talked about, and you've made a very, you've emphasized this. You've made a very good point about it. And I think it's something that our panel would agree with you on, and that's EXIF data. it's really important for folks to be able to have the exchangeable image file format in order to be able to do kind of, I guess, forensic-like investigation or forensic investigation on image-related material that is handed over to MUFON to investigate. What are your thoughts on EXIF in photography regarding the topic?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, very critical. In fact, we went over that in that training in the boot camp as well. And really, I've got 3 references that might be good for folks to have that you can make use of. First of all, www.exifdata.com. And if you can use that on your computer, you just upload an image into that, and it performs that analysis, and you can see all the EXIF data, which is super valuable. And then there's also another one called photoforensics.com, and that's photo with an F, F-O-T-O, forensics. And that takes a look at it from a different perspective. It really is an indicator whether an image has been tampered with or not. It helps you identify that. And then, of course, videos also have the equivalent of EXIF data. But yeah, you need a special viewer for that. And so I can give you that reference here. It's www.mediaarea.net. And again, you can break down a video in the same way as you can a photo with the background EXIF data, which again is very helpful. You're able to, confirm what and where and when with that, as well as whether it's been tampered with or altered in any way. So it's very useful.
Thank you very, very much for sharing that information. I wanted to go ahead and introduce a gentleman by the name of Steve Hudgens, who's the International Director of Investigations for MUFON. He's a MUFON member since 1991. Welcome, Steve, to our show. Thank you very much for having joined us today.
Hello, it's good to be here.
Hey, Steve.
Steve, I just wanted to catch you up on a few things that we've been talking about. And you and I actually had a talk about this recently. And that was theodolite, stellarium, geostat watch, flight radar 24, the Tesla meter, iSeek thermal devices, temperature and humidity devices, and radiation detector devices. I had read to you a list that Rich Hoffman had put together. You said you had actually used one or a few of those apps. Do you mind telling us which app you used and why you felt was instrumental as an aid regarding a UFO investigation?
Well, I use some of those, but not all of them. But the theodolite has a lot of information on there. I suggest anyone and everyone grab that and use it. You can just point that thing to whatever you're looking at and take a photograph, and it gives you the height, the measurements, and just everything you need to know. And like I said, it takes a photograph, and you can save it, send it out, or whatever. The flat radar 24 is great if you want to, like you see. I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine in Ohio. He was always telling me about these UFOs he sees all the time, constantly. And I was up there with him one night, and he said, "There's one right now." So I pulled up Flight 24 and showed him what airplane he was looking at, and it just blew his bubble. He couldn't stand it. And then probably a month later, he called me back again. Of course, I'm back home. And he says, "I see another UFO." So I said, "Okay, hold on a minute." I pulled up flight radar and went to where he is. And I told him, "Okay, it's an airplane." He says, "How do you know it's an airplane?" I said, "I can see it." And I said, "Just hold on a minute." I said, "Now it's turning and going north." He said, "How'd you know that?" "Because I see the airplane." so it just ruined him. And so, it works really good for that. Yeah. He's been telling me all his life. He was a Navy buddy of mine. He's been telling me all his life about his UFO experiences. And it's disheartening to him to find out that he's been looking at airplanes going to Columbus, Ohio, and landing. And, it ruined his day.
And that's actually a good segue for me to ask Earl Gray. He and I have talked at length about this topic I'm about to bring up to the panel. And that is the fact that Earl will come across folks who will reach MUFON in the hopes of having their UFO, the UFO activity they feel they've captured by whatever means. And they are so emotionally invested in whatever it is they're giving to MUFON to look over, that like Earl, for example, has had to deal with people getting very upset with him when he's like, "Well, that's a drone. That's something else." Earl, can you chime in on that?
Sure. Well, I mean, we do provide that service to the public. I mean, we don't want people to think that we're being invaded, you know. And I had one case in particular where this woman said, well, a UFO was hounding my daughter's high school graduation. It's like, oh, you know, she said, yeah, it was flying over the crowd. It wasn't a large UFO. And I was going, well, wait a minute. So it was flashing lights or something. She said, no, it's just hovering very quietly, silently, you know. And I said, did they have like aerial photography or video of your daughter's graduation by any chance? And she said, oh yeah. It's up on YouTube, in fact, you know. And we wound up, of course, deducting that she was seeing the drone that they were doing the aerial video of the graduation from, and she felt silly. But you know, you try to. That's one thing I try to do is help the person to not feel silly. You know, I had a scientist that was living out in Newbury Park that reported repeated UFO sightings. So they were flashing lights and spinning around, and again, you know, it was the proverbial description of a RC drone, and you know, eventually he concluded as well that that's what he was seeing. So I'll sometimes tell them, well, I had a scientist that this fooled as well, and so don't feel bad. And I'll remind people of the good Dr. Hynek's old assessment that 90 to 95% of UFO reports wind up being prosaic objects. So that's what we usually get. You know, of course, it's that 5 to 10% that's interesting, that kind of blows our socks off.
You know, an interesting story I heard about Hynek. I don't know, maybe you can vouch for this, maybe not, that he was actually on a plane and he saw something that was UFO related and then forgot about it and remembered it later.
He did. He did see something from an airplane. That is true. Paul, his son Paul, actually mentioned that recently. We were talking about I talk with Paul a lot. He's kind of become a friend of mine, and he's got a lot of good anecdotes about his dad. I'm hoping he eventually writes that book. He has a wonderful PowerPoint presentation he gives.
Yeah, I think Paul Hynek spoke at MUFON this year at this MUFON symposium. I was going to ask our panel, can people chime in on what the difference is between a Chinese lantern, a drone, a satellite, anything like Venus in the sky, anything at all that can be determined as just that? How does a person attain skill sets in order to be able to discern the difference? Anybody want to chime in on that?
Well, satellites are going to be moving. Venus is going to be very far away. The drone, the Chinese lanterns, you can generally see them flickering. Yeah, you can kind of tell. There are a lot of videos of different sky lanterns have been videoed all over the place, and you can kind of tell. And I suppose with some of these apps, you could probably pick up a heat signature because there's flame involved in getting them up in the air. So those should be pretty easy to kind of figure out what they are. As the app that Rich had mentioned, Stellarium, you can tell where Venus is. Jupiter is another planet that can get people's attention, and they think they might be seeing something pretty interesting there. So, you know, obviously Venus is a few million miles away from us. A satellite, they're in movement. You're going to see them usually maybe a couple 100,000 feet above the Earth, so they're pretty far away. Drones and sky lanterns are going to be a little bit closer. The one drone that I saw one evening that really got my attention was lit up with the LED lights, and I think they're pretty recognizable, but obviously people don't know what they don't know, so some folks might not be able to spot them, but they've got those LED lights that kind of stand out. And again, with the lanterns, the sky lanterns, you've got that flickering flame inside the lantern to keep it up in the air. It's basically sort of a miniature hot air balloon, and that's basically what they are. And if anybody wants to add to that, go.
A Chinese lantern has a very short period of time that it'll stay lit. It's got, it has one of those little votive candles in it. And so a proverbial Chinese lantern Siding, it'll usually be the color of a flame, kind of a golden color. It'll move along with the wind. And that's always a good thing too. You can go to weatherunderground.com and get the direction that the wind was going at a particular time, at any date, pretty much. You can just put it into the historic weather site that's on there, and you can find out the speed and direction of the winds. And that I use very often. I used that one to close a hoax where a guy had put together a kite that looked like a TR-3B black, the black triangular UFO, and it was very funny how he didn't edit his video very carefully, and you watch this thing crash into the ocean. And I told him, well, I didn't get a star team request, to go out to Point Doom that night, and there were no reports of crashing triangular UFOs out there. And it's really funny, I'm looking at the direction the wind was blowing, and right, I can see the video readout, and exactly at the moment where your UFO crashes into the ocean, the wind suddenly went to zero, the wind speed. So I was able to just use that simple app to close a guy's hoax.
Let me jump in here. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish up there, Earl.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
No, this is Rich. I was just going to jump in on a couple things. Number one, I'm a pilot of a drone, so I know about the lighting. You can get all kinds of lighting packages for like the type of drone that I've got, and I had one gentleman that was actually working on my security system who didn't know who I was at the time. And my relationship to the UFO subject, who was telling me, oh, he's a drone pilot. He builds his drones. He's got, different kinds of things. Oh, and I built a frame that I could put around it to make it look like a flying saucer. And I have lights that rotate around on the outside of it. And I like to fly it and create all kinds of wonderful UFO reports and stuff like that. Oh, really? So I said, well,
troublemaker.
When you're flying, please, that type of thing.
Dean Ashley, I do want to jump in here really fast because Dean actually is involved in creating drones as a hobby, quadrocopters, multi-rotor related drones. And he enjoys building them and he enjoys flying them. And he can make a good argument regarding why the objects seen in the FLIR videos that he creates, the FLIR UFO videos, could not be drones. Can you please give us input on that topic, Dean?
Sure. I started with the drones back about, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And the wife didn't want me spending a whole bunch of money on them, so I built them. I bought parts online, $30 here, $40 there, and it slipped under her radar, so then I could put it all together. Just couldn't make a big one-time purchase. So then I started building them, and like Rich, I had made one that looked like a UFO with the lights and everything, and I flew it at night. This was before all the regulations. But my neighbor came home and he parked and he saw me landed in the driveway. He said, "Dave, that you?" And I said, "Yeah, that's me." He was like, "Ah." He was way down a couple of miles away and he could see it in the sky and he was convinced he saw a UFO. So it was kind of disappointing for him too. But there's I usually detect planes and that kind of stuff by movement. So the way that a drone moves, once you start flying them, you get used to, the way that they kind of tilt sideways and move in a diagonal fashion, or the way they can zip up and down. But you get used to the movement, and they're kind of easy to identify after a while.
Okay, and Michael, I was going to ask you, I know you see a lot of satellites out there with your UFO I-team, and you all have become experts in discerning the difference between satellites, drones, Chinese lanterns, and the like. What kinds of challenges are you faced with when you go out in the field to try and capture UFO activity?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Chant. It's always one of those things that you can learn over time with experience. Just with your naked eye or your equipment, what you're looking at. There's nothing that will replace the idea of time at a skywatch and doing it more often, that you can kind of, pick up these little subtle differences. But I'll tell you what, our Dave Mason, photographer, techie guy, along with Lee Strauss on our team, have really upped our game with the idea that we now can take light sources from the night sky and turn them into audio frequencies that can be data that we can look at on oscilloscopes. So our oscilloscope data can determine if this is going to be a drone or a sky lantern or anything like that, because they'll come off with a certain frequency that is typical of those kinds of objects. So when we see something that is very unusual as a frequency signature, then we'll know we're probably looking at something we need to get some more data on. And specifically, I'll tell you, the recent stuff we've been finding out, this was Lee Strauss's data, when he has recorded a few of the nighttime videos of UFOs that we have, that we typically in the old days used to think traveled in a straight line. When we had enough capability to zoom in on those trajectory, basically videos that we've got, we're finding out that they kind of travel in a sine wave. That's SINE wave that is basically oscillating in the night sky rather than in a straight line. So when we find that, and then our data shows that this sine wave seems to be very similar to the Schumann resonance of our own planet, the whole idea that there is a bubble around our planet that resonates in a certain hertz area, which is 7.83
Yep.
cycles per second, right, Frank? And this is interesting to us, that when we find anomalous objects that are reflecting the frequency of the Schumann resonance, we're wondering what the heck is going on, because airplanes, satellites, and those kind of man-made objects do not reflect that kind of resonance.
And let me jump in here and ask Steve really quickly. Steve, you were heavily involved with a case that was very hot when I first got proactively interested in all this UFO stuff, the Stephenville case. You didn't have this kind of gear available back then. Is that about right?
Stephenville, what's that? No, I'm just kidding. And no, we didn't have all the fancy little apps and things of that nature. We just had to go down and do it the hard way. But the interesting thing about Stephenville is the entire area is surrounded with a military operating zone all around it. And that's what people were seeing for the most part, were airplanes, flares of that nature. And we found out that there's only 10,000 different types of flares that they drop. So each one is different in their own right. But what was really striking about the entire thing was the sighting of what I call the flying Walmart. That's the object that's a mile long or wide, whatever, by half a mile.
That was the one that was picked up on radar, right?
Yes, at one point, Steve Allen and his group, they picked that up on radar in his area. But there was another incident of this object that went over Stephenville itself. And it was viewed by 4 or 5, I know 4 police officers. And these police officers were scattered around Stephenville, and they all saw it. So that puts a little credence. But then you have to ask yourself, why would an extraterrestrial race, whatever, fly a massive ship very slowly over Stephenville, where they know good and well that's the planet of the apes, and they all have guns, and not to mention that they're in the middle of a military fly zone. So I have to ask myself, what was it really, us or them?
And that one of those guys would be that Officer X fella. Do you know who I'm talking about there?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I remember him doing an interview on Angela Joyner's podcast when she had one way back in the day, back in prehistoric times, where he said that he was able to track it with his radar. I guess the radar you normally use to track speeders, and he had it at the whopping speed of like 35 miles an hour, something like that.
Huh.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It was going by real slow.
Yeah. Now, that case still, it attracted an awful lot of attention. You think a lot of those sightings were misidentifications, but there might be one or two in there that were pretty serious, the one that was picked up on radar?
Exactly. And I mean to tell you, when we went down there, it was startling because we had the meeting in Dublin, Texas, there where they make the Dr. Pepper, and they only have 2 red lights in that entire town. And when we got down there, they witnessed the only traffic blockage in that city in the city's lifetime. There was that many people down there for this meeting. The room that we had there was completely full, overrun. People had to stand outside, and they left. Most of them did. But what really struck me the most was when it was time I went up there and had to talk, and I went up there and looked, and the podium that was in front of me was just staggered with all these microphones. I said, man, what? It looked like a cactus. I said, what is this? I looked up, and right in front of me in a semicircle were cameras, ABC, NBC, all of them were there. And I really started getting kind of, here we go, kind of moment. But it was an event, all right. But for the most part, they were identifying, like I said, known objects until the flying Walmart.
Oh, Steve, you're breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit.
Oh, I hate that. What did I miss?
You said until
the flying Walmart.
and then
Yes, until the flying Walmart flew by. That's the only thing that was really standing out.
Now, folks that don't remember, I mean, this case got a lot of national attention. You're talking about the networks. Larry King made the pilgrimage down there from D.C. and had quite a few people on, dedicated an entire show to the case. And I think it's pretty interesting at the time when it was happening. And what's really interesting about it now is it seems to be pretty well forgotten. And it actually happened in, I guess, late 2008? Is that when most of the sightings popped up?
It was actually early 2008, in February
early 2008.
March.
Okay.
And there was another incident at the latter part of the year in November. And it was actually a more striking incident than the first one.
Okay.
Several witnesses. We have a radar analysis of it by I forget his name, the Montana state director, but we didn't make a big heyday out of that because I actually got tired of doing all the radio interviews.
Well, thanks for joining us today. And one other thing I think is quite interesting. Now it seems to be completely forgotten. It's really the last time I think an entire community has kind of gotten up in arms over a series of UFO sightings. And that is, it's one UFO sighting that did get a lot of attention in its day that happened right smack dab in the middle when this ATIP program was going on. And I did get the opportunity to ask George Knapp if ATIP looked at Stephenville at all. And he said it was investigated. He wasn't sure if it was ATIP or OSAP, but somebody it was investigated. So I was wondering if you have any additional feedback on all that.
You know, it's kind of funny when somebody investigates an incident and they don't call the investigators. No one called me.
Okay.
Rich Hoffman, did you want to chime in on that topic?
What, on Stephenville?
Yeah.
Well,
I know you're still working with Robert Powell, and he's the one who put together the report that included the radar data. So, yeah, if you've got anything additional to jump in with, we'd like to hear it.
No, there's really, I have nothing more to add to what he's done. He's done a fabulous job with that. What I was going to chime in on was more along the lines of the topic we were talking about, which was the drones and various other kinds of things like satellites and stuff.
Please do, please.
The the Chinese lights, and so I happened to be at one location where I was actually watching 40 of these lights being shut off, if you would, and I looked at my wife and I said, "Watch, I'm going to get UFO reports." And sure enough, before I got home, I had UFO reports, and this one guy said, "Man, I work at NASA and I'm an engineer, and I thought that there was a UFO investigation or an invasion going on because he saw all 40 of them going over the highway."
Wow.
So, but anyway, they tend to be flickering. They can be different colors besides the orange, depending upon the bag or whatever you have that is lit up. So you can have the if you would, that the bag could be a red color. It could be a lot of other colors, and then they've added some other kinds of features to these things as well. They got different sizes to them, so that can even confuse you even more, because you could have a Chinese lantern, but they'll tend to flicker a lot of times, and as pointed out earlier, they'll eventually go out. And we look for wind direction for that. We can determine speeds of them, and they do have a good clip. They'll take off once they get up to a little bit above the ground level, and the wind can just make them zip along. A lot of people were doing that, but then they were running into problems where even these things would drop in a dry area and they could cause a ground fire.
Yep.
So a lot of places were shutting them down on that. I'll also point out that drones are not supposed to be flown in the evening after dark, according to the FAA. And so that's cutting back on a lot of drone flights. You're supposed to be within line of sight, but yet you still will see people doing like fireworks displays, and you'll see drones around them. I've watched a set of 4 drones this past 4th of July that were zipping around and doing some incredible kinds of things. Again, I mentioned the light patterns could be all different kinds of things on them. And you just have to be aware that they're there, and know that is a potential confusion that a lot of people will have about those. Satellites, tend to be one of those things that are very small little lights. In fact, I'll be honest with you, a lot of people that may see a satellite might also be seeing a high-flying jet. And if you take a look at the size of an aircraft that might be flying at 40,000 feet, and you look down at the ground even from that up above, everything is like a spot. You can't see anything. And so aircraft could be flying over it, and you wouldn't even know what that is as well. So there's a lot of things that are in the atmosphere that we just don't know. The Earth light phenomena that I'm looking at in Cloverdale, I mean, that's just the 8-foot in diameter balls of like something like a glowing gas, if you would. And those things are moving along at a good clip, about 20 miles an hour, and they're going along, and they're completely natural objects. They're not UFOs, but I think a lot of those things are being reported, and people see those things, those, if you would, spook lights. So there's a lot of phenomena we need to be aware of, and a lot of confusion on the part of a lot of the public. And the more we can educate the public, the better off it'll be.
So I wanted to bring up something that Dr. Irina Scott brought up in our last program. Just wanted to give a little background on her for our listeners so they know who she is. She's the great-great-grandniece of John Purdue. She has a PhD in physiology from the University of Missouri and was an assistant professor of biology at St. Bonaventure University. She's published works in biology and about UFO, the UFO topic numerous times, and Ohio history. And Irina was also on the MUFON board of directors in the 90s through the 2000s, and investigator and consultant, and was an investigator for QFOS. She brought up a theory that she expressed in her book, Inside the Lightning Ball, and at the 2019 MUFON Symposium presentation, that some UFOs may be images such as holograms, volumetric display, or similar things. Now, if we're dealing with a phenomenon that is at times intangible, how then are we supposed to capture that and, with the forensic tools we have available to us, determine really what it is or what it's not? Anyone?
Well, I think you have to be pretty lucky to get something that's really anomalous. That's really what it comes down to. One thing that is not really being honed in on is every time, especially Lou Elizondo is getting asked about the frequency of these type of tic-tac Roosevelt type cases. You can't get a straight answer out of the guy. I know when he was at your conference, Rich, that was one of the better questions that was asked of him. He said he didn't know at that point. When they did the show over the summertime, the unidentified show, he said it was a sensitive number. And it's like without that, we might be talking about something that maybe happens once a month, quarterly, who knows? It might be something that's happening quite regularly. I mean, we really just don't know.
Yeah. Hey, Frank.
Yeah, precisely.
Go ahead, Michael. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Michael again. You hit the nail right on the head there, Frank, because we have been able to just recently now kind of get that frequency data from these UAP that we're noticing on video. And it's very interesting to me that you're saying that Lou doesn't want to go there at this point to kind of get to that detail of what these anomalous objects are giving off as far as frequencies, either in the light, the FLIR, or whatever zone of capture we can get them in, because it seems to me.
Yeah, Michael. Just to be clear, when I say frequency in this context, I mean how often are these types of things happening, and not talking about frequency of light, sound frequency, that kind of thing. So, but no, keep going. I just wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, and I think that is going to be the wave of the future as far as our scientific ability to research all of this data. If we can actually come up with the frequencies through hertz and cycles per second of how these lights travel and what kind of signals they emit, those are really going to be telling on how and when these things are being cited as anomalous, or if there are known craft out there. So I think that's going to be a fascinating thing for us on the UFOI team for the future.
That's a good point. This is Rich. I just want to point out to you that even in the Cloverdale case, where you have these repeatable lights, if you would, part of what we're looking at is there some sort of a resonance that's going on with the object that they're described as being like a pulsing kind of thing. So there might be some sort of cycling, if you would, that's going on about the inside of the ball, if you would, and that we're looking at. The other part of that is that we've dealt with microwave radiation. There's the different kinds of, like I said, the magnetometer kind of things. There's all different kinds of these things we need to really get, and you can't get them from, things like a high flying light in the sky. Okay, you're not going to get those. You don't have the equipment to be able to have the sensors or the sensitivity to be able to pick up something that might be at 40,000 feet. Okay, I mean, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to get that, but on close encounters, if you would, where you're very close, that kind of data is very, very crucial. And so we need to be able to get that kind of data around close objects, if you would, and to start to learn at all those kinds of things like you're talking about. There was a case that I know that Robert Powell had looked into it. It was also one of the case of years in MUFON, where there was that dumbbell-shaped object. And on that particular instance, the individual was able to get an audio recording. And then when you actually played the audio recording, you're able to actually hear some sort of a type of pulsation, if you would, that's going on around the object. And so that kind of information is extremely important to have, and allows then us to get a better understanding of an object that is extremely elusive. And we don't often have the gear to be able to capture solid data about. So we need to keep doing that and learning and utilizing better tools. And I'm glad that that you're addressing this on the air right now, because I think it's an important aspect of where we need to go. It's got to be around the tool sets. There's a lot of projects that are out there. UFO DAP is one of them. UFO Data has something that they're doing. You have the MADAR project, and they're all trying to build these kinds of devices that will have even magnetometers, and then they feed data, if you would, into a central database. And they're excellent projects and will help us to get a lot of good information and data.
And thank you for talking about that, Rich, by the way, regarding MADAR. We do, as Rich does know, have an interview with Francis Ridge, who's head of MADAR. And that'll be on Wednesday of next week in the evening, 7 p.m. Arizona time. I wanted to bring up something yet again regarding the topic of sort of the multidimensional nature, possibly, of this phenomenon. I'll give an example. Dr. Richard Haynes, who worked for NASA, Michael Hall, actually knows him very well. He's very close to him, and that is also a client of his. I wanted to read something that Dr. Richard Haynes said. And so I'm just cutting right into an interview he had. And so it's not really going to start off at the beginning. It's in the middle of the interview. He says, "That's my experience. In general, you are exactly right. I share your view that it is extremely multidimensional." He's talking about the UFO phenomenon. So much so that traditional science is really not up to the task. Now, that's an insight that has come slowly over the years because I clung to science as a method, a technique to tease out these fine points and eventually get to the bottom of it. But the longer I am looking at the evidence, the less I am convinced that's the way to go. There certainly is a part of the phenomenon that will yield to science. But there is a whole other psychic or psychological dimension that not even psychology is going to come close to. I can see why a lot of my colleagues are in denial about this. He said it's simply too much to get your mind around regarding the topic of the UFO phenomenon. What is everybody's thought processes on that? How do we capture that and record it if it's that multidimensional and science isn't up to the task of getting it, so to speak?
Witness testimony is very important still. You know, you have to remember that we are sort of Leonardo da Vinci trying to take apart an iPhone, you know? And there's some things that are simply going to be out of our reach. You know, I mean, you look at the whole the Nimitz affair and how it was breaking physical laws as we know them. And, you know, it doesn't mean that it was not a scientific phenomena that was happening or that was magic. It's just that it's beyond what we can do and maybe even understand, you know, that there were not repeated sonic booms or a fireball created, you know, when this thing was, you know, making 90-degree turns at that speed. So that's where I think witness testimony, as simple as it is, if you have multiple witnesses collating their reports and you know, you can put together a pretty good picture with that. And it, you know, you remember it. I mean, as Michael Hall knows, that will hold up in court, you know.
Let's take a look at a case, for example, the JAL case, for example, where you have an object that like just appears out of nowhere, and you would think that would be an example of a multidimensional, if you would. Not that we've ever seen anything go into another dimension, by the way, or we're even aware of what another dimension really is, because it's all theoretical. But my point being that you know, that object kind of appeared out of nowhere, and it's being tracked by two different radars. So, I mean, even if you would, some object that appears out of nowhere is apparently being capable of being perceived or by some sort of sensory device. And then take a look at the fact that you had Ted Phillips, who was collecting over 4,000 to 5,000, you know, physical effects from these objects. So that you can't ignore the fact that they're out there creating, they're being picked up on radar. Sometimes they're not at other times. Maybe that's in the nature of that particular radar set and its frequency that it's tuned to, that maybe that's why that radar station picked it up and the other one didn't. But they are being captured. And so I'm not exactly sure where to go with that multi-dimensional kind of thing. That's kind of like more of a theory about where they come from, I guess, as opposed to anything else. But it has nothing to do with the fact that it's being perceived in our atmosphere by an individual, being captured on film. It's also sometimes tracked on radar. And so I don't know where to go with it other than that.
Shane, you had this interesting training event that's what is it, annual or happens every so often with MUFON. It's a training camp for folks to understand a little bit more about attaining skill sets for investigating the UFO phenomenon and more. Wanted to ask you, what do you do if you're faced with a possible real UFO phenomenon, so to speak, and it's blinking in and out, and it doesn't appear to be tangible? What then?
Yeah, I mean, good question. And
how do you train people on that is what I meant to connect that with the camp that you guys had.
Yeah, it's a matter of judgment, and it's just one piece of data out of all of the data that you collect. So no one thing, no one photo, no one video, no testimony on its own, can really achieve a 100% identification. So you have to take it in context with the other data. And so, it's true. 90% of the time you can identify these things, these reports as prosaic objects, but I mean, for the sake of argument, 90% and 10% unknown. But to me, the real question is why is there 90% misidentification? I mean, what is it about what people are seeing, why they're seeing it, how they're seeing it? What is it that causes them to misinterpret, something prosaic versus something not? And to me, that's where there's a lot of room for us to, educate and help the cause, because, you have to wade through 90% of the cases till you get to one that's, potentially, unexplainable. I mean, people just aren't used to the context by which they see things, right? We don't walk around looking up all the time. We look straight ahead or down. But on the occasion that we do and we see something, people kind of leap to that. This is an unexplainable thing. But, in relation to our whole conversation here, 90%, that represents a whole bunch of stuff. And you can do the process of elimination yourself as an eyewitness, right? You can say, hey, that looks weird, but I'm in this city and there's lots of airplanes, or is it a planet? Can I check? That kind of thing. Could it be a drone or a balloon or blah, blah, blah? I mean, that's the conclusion people should jump to first, not the unknown. So, I mean, that would be really helpful if people were educated enough to make that determination on their own, so that, MUFON doesn't have, I don't have to be the bad guy investigator to say, yeah, you saw Chinese lanterns, But however, that's not the state that we're in. So we have to deal with what we're dealing with. And the fact is that, yeah, I know I first got into ufology, I was a total nuts and bolts guy. However, as time has gone on, I began to realize there seems to be something more to it. What it is, I don't know. But, to Rich's point earlier, look, there's a ton of data that can be derived from the observations that we have, instrumentation, all of those things. That's scientific, that's physical, and that's real. However, there's another part of this that isn't identifiable by those means or measurable by the instruments and the methodologies that we have. And so that's where you have to be open-minded, and you cannot discount information or data, be it witness testimony or something else, because it doesn't fit your perspective, of what it could be. So, as an investigator, really, I try and go in as unbiased as possible, not pro-UFO, not negative UFO, and just look at the data and put all those pieces together and then see what kind of picture is painted. I guess the last thing I'll say is when I do interview someone, I always ask this question, and it's really interesting, the responses that you can get. But I will say, if you could put into a few words or a single sentence what is it about what you saw that caused you to think that is a UFO as opposed to something prosaic like an aircraft or a balloon or whatever. And I get some really interesting results. Some people get stymied by that. They're like, I can't tell you. Or others say, definitely, it was, the behavior, or the movement, or the color, or something like that. But this is really about how people interpret what they're seeing. And so that to me, if we, just like this program, we're educating people on what to look for, how to view it, what you are seeing, and try and be scientific first. Do that process of elimination. What are the 10 prosaic things this could be? Now, if you're out in the middle of nowhere, I mean, hundreds of miles from any city, anything, and you're seeing something quite strange, hey, there's a very good chance that's something unknown. However, otherwise, know your surroundings, know the context, and try and be scientific in your view.
I wanted to bring up something else, but I just want to make a comment. Why does it seem like we are the backwoods people in that movie Deliverance, and the possible ET civilizations are the ones that are looking at us like we are outdated? It just comes across me like that. I don't know. Anyway, maybe it's just me. Let
me jump in here, Chant, and ask a question. It seems to me, with all this gear that's suddenly available, these apps that are suddenly available for regular folks, for a long time now, exoplanet hunters have used sort of just regular folks. There's a SETI at Home program. There is programs where folks can download data and help in identifying exoplanets out of their home computers, that type of thing. It looks to me like maybe the UFO field is sort of heading in that direction, becoming a lot more open in terms of gathering and sharing data, and just looking to get anybody's thoughts on that kind of thing. Are we seeing sort of a UFO research at home or from individuals? Are we getting to that point? Anybody?
Well, I think so, and those apps are something to prove that, right?
Right.
I mean, the capability, that's what the difference is, I mean, I'm blown away by phone applications compared to even our computer. I mean, the things you can do with that thing in your hand is absolutely a mind blower. And that availability and that simplicity and the efficiency of how well those things work and the ubiquitousness of a cell phone usage and possession is unbelievable. So, I mean, I think you're right, Frank, that it's going to be citizen UFO investigators in a lot of way. And again, the more that we talk this up and the more disclosure occurs and people become familiar and not so scared of the issue, that we're going to see an uptick in that. And I think it will be helpful. Of course, we'll have to sift through, sort of the nonsense, but, that it should elicit some scientific data that's of use.
Yeah.
Let me.
This is Michael again, real quick. We're also looking at the capability of the people who use the phones currently. And when we're looking to the future, the young millennials and the Zoomers out there, they are way beyond our capability right now in using these apps. So I tell you what, there is going to be a hone in on disclosure very shortly as these young people get into the idea that UFOs can be tracked and the data can be recorded right on their phone with all of these technical gear and everything at their fingertips. So I'm assuming that it's not going to be too long before disclosure will actually happen because of too many people knowing all the data that's out there.
This is Earl again. I seem to be getting more UFO reports where people do their own research before they put in their report. And sometimes they're military. I had like a ex Air Force guy who saw the Starlink SpaceX satellite train, and a lot of people saw that. I guess that. Am I correct, Shane? I guess that Phoenix MUFON got 8 different cases. I think we got 3.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And it looks weird, I mean, there are these evenly spaced lights, and this guy, he was perplexed. He said, "Well, I checked my plane radar." He had the radar app on his phone, and he isn't even a MUFON member. I told him, "Hey, you should join MUFON. We need guys." But I mean, it stumped even some of our better people, and luckily I had been aware of the launch. It was, I think, November 11th. And but it looks very strange, and people reported it, and so I do think people are looking up. People are kind of doing their own. Of course, you got the guys that just are addicted to ancient aliens and stuff, and everything for them is always going to be a UFO, unfortunately. But I do think that you're correct, that Michael is correct about the millennials, and people are being a little more proactive about, trying to figure out what it could have been that they saw. So it's different than it was even just 3 years ago. I see a little bit more proactiveness in the public.
Are you guys aware, Shane and Earl? I know you're really proactive on gathering different sightings through MUFON. Are you guys, and Steve too, also with the international MUFON? Are you guys seeing any cases where there's some payoff from these kind of apps being readily used? Can you point to any particular case where it's like, okay, great, this guy's got this. That makes it a much better case.
I have one I'm working on right now where the guy used the satellite tracker, and he was able to. He notated that there were no satellites in the sky at the time that he saw what he saw. But again, his report is a light in the sky, and I'm not sure. You know how much I love light in the sky reports.
Right.
Kind of a dime a dozen, and that could have been ET. It could have been a secret project. Black budget stuff. I mean, people see a lot of satellite activity that moves strangely and goes out of the ecliptic for a bit, and it seems so often that you have to figure that it's probably some black ops satellite that we have that can move on its own accord. But I talked to a little bit with Chase Klotsky about that recently, and just because it moves angularly doesn't mean that it's not a satellite these days. So that's something to think about. It might not be on satellite tracker if it's a black budget project.
Exactly.
And I'm glad you brought that up. Very good point. Somebody else was breaking in. Who was that?
Well, that was Rich. I was just going to mention since we're talking about satellites. First off, there's probably about 50 satellites at any one time directly above you. If you just open up the GeoSat watch, you'll see that there's always satellites above you. The second point that I was going to mention is that Philippe Alvarez, who presented at the SCU conference in March, presented on using to do UFO research by using the European Space Agency satellites. They're doing Earth observation. And you would be able to actually look at the live data feeds from those satellites going across, and that might be able to be used for UFO investigation. I think we need to get to the fact that if we've got satellites that can detect everything down below, I mean, literally in the military, we got satellites that can see a golf ball and read the golf ball from, on the ground. That there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to or encourage the use of satellites to be able to do most all of this.
You mean civilians using a satellite system?
Yeah. I mean, European Space Agency's Earth observation stuff is all available to the open public.
Okay.
But my point there is, I'm getting at again, is that we are so monitored from space that there is at any one time, I don't care where the UFO is, it should be observable from a satellite. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you really want to do justice to figuring this all out, we need to be able to start leveraging some of these tools that we've already spent oodles of money on and doing this. And that will give us a lot of data.
Okay, I wanted to make a few comments. that I think are actually really important. One is the International Space Station for NASA can be seen by the naked eye. Also wanted to point out there's an individual involved in ufology. I'm not going to mention any names. This person has a Skywatch program that they have had for many years. And this individual and I have had arguments regarding this person training people in a fashion that is incorrect regarding what UFOs are and satellites are. So when she's using the military grade binoculars to hand around to folks for her groups, she's told me this, she truly believes she's looking at ET related craft in the sky when really it is just satellites that they're looking at. Wanted to point out something else about satellites, and that is a lot of people need to understand that there are an awful lot of satellites. I don't know the number. I don't think anybody really does.
Thousands.
That could be but that could be top secret related. And so you might use a satellite tracking app, but it's not going to tell you all the satellites that are truly out there. The other thing I wanted to mention is Dr. Irena Scott brought up in our last program stereoscopy equipment used in aerial photography, which is what she used and her boss used when she worked for the government. And that's when two photographs overlap over the same ground area. They're photographed from two separate positions, and it forms a stereo pair, and it's used for three-dimensional viewing. So that it's interesting if you're able to actually use that kind of equipment to get something that is anomalous, because you'll get two different pictures. Also wanted to bring up something interesting that a friend of mine brought to my attention. And he said during the Blitz, which was a German bombing campaign against the United Kingdom in 1940, 1941 during the Second World War, England actually trained its citizens to look up at the sky for objects in the sky at all times. And I think that's interesting regarding history. That's it. That's what I had to say.
Could I throw in too?
Yes.
At the boot camp, Mark D'Antonio was explaining some information about satellites that I was unaware. And he says that there are satellites that travel in pairs, that travel in triplet, like a triangle, and even quadruple, and that they have the capability to either be, stationary in terms of the position of each other, or they can even move. And that would appear to be a very strange thing to see, right? And there is always that common sighting of, a triangle really far up. And in fact, it could be, a configuration of satellites, like 3 satellites at each, corner point of a triangle. So I was unaware of that, and I thought that was very interesting and useful.
That's super. Actually, we have to know that. That's very, very important for people to know. I've never even heard of that.
I've never seen anything like that.
I had a case that I investigated that was like that turned out to be that. It was 4 satellites that were actually working around each other. So,
Yeah, I think that's very useful. I had not known that.
Okay, it looks like we have Dr. Irena Scott with us. And Dr. Irena, hi, how are you?
Hi, I didn't know I was supposed to be here.
You know what? We are so glad to have you here. I actually was just talking about you, and I was talking about how you brought up the topic of stereoscopy and when you worked for the government regarding aerial photography, and how important it was and instrumental in that it actually allowed for 2 different photographs to capture possible anomalous activity. Not that it was used necessarily for that, but just thought that was an interesting point that you made in the last show.
Yeah, they used it in mapping a lot to map contours of mountains and things. But it is very handy because you can get a stereo shot. And if you take several, you could get a good position for things.
Great.
Altitude and everything like that.
Yeah, and also I brought up something else that you brought to our attention during the show that we had on equipment, tools, and apps to procure possible UAP activity in the sky. And that is a theory you expressed in your book, Inside the Lightning Ball, and in your 2019 MUFON Symposium talk, that some UFOs may be images such as holograms, volumetric display, or similar things. Can you please explain to us what volumetric display means regarding that narrow topic?
It's like a hologram, but it's where they shine a light sort of on particles in the air instead of the way they do holograms. And it's more accurate, I think, and you can see it from different angles and that sort of thing.
Okay, fantastic. And we were also just talking about satellites and the difference between satellites and actually how to spot them in the sky. So I'm just really glad you were able to join us. Is there anything else you'd like to add regarding equipment, tools, applications, and just skill sets to attain in order to discern what could be anomalous objects in the sky?
Well, I think if you have a cell phone or anything like that, and you don't think you can take a picture, well, take one anyway, because they have a little to do. Even if you get a horrible picture and don't even think you have one, you might get one.
Great. And yeah, we were also talking about EXIF data, and actually you spoke about that last show, that exchangeable image format is really important for forensic information in order to discern what kind of digital picture it is somebody's looking at to see if it's been manipulated.
Yeah, because if somebody sends in a fake picture and they don't know that you can check on it, well, I learned that from some other people that, you can find a hoax pretty easily. But then also for your own information, that data is very useful too.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for having been on our show today. Frank, do you have anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I think we're just about ready to go. Just a final comment. This is what we're into is all about gathering and sharing data about what we find, no matter how it manifests itself. And that's what we're here for. And just glad to be a part of all this.
I wanted to mention one last thing. I'm very sorry, Frank. I always do this to you. And that is, there's a gentleman by the name of Ron Lanham who is going to join us for the show today, but he had to beg out due to work. But he wanted us to know this. Best equipment he has ever used, in his opinion, was a 7x50 binoculars. He does have a tri-field meter for various things, and it's set to magnetic. He has to be careful with sensitivity on this, as it can pick up any disturbance in an EM field, even lightning and meteorites. He uses and recommends the app Plane Finder, AR. It has ruled out many strange lights. Keep it in mind, it does not list ever flights such as military or drone activity, but it does help. And he says he doesn't have any night vision equipment yet, but he would add a pair of NVG goggles to any field kit if you can afford to do so. Take an audio recorder for notes and log anything you see on that date, time, and description of what you're seeing and feeling. This can be the best evidence if it compares to another independent witness from your area, which I know everyone on our panel would agree with, because that's just normal regarding MUFON investigations.
We didn't really talk about the old school binoculars, but they can be a lot of help too if you're out in the field looking for something.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, Frank, did you have anything else?
We are good to go.
Okay.
It's fantastic.
Did anyone else on our panel have anything, any last things to add?
I apologize. I wasn't even here. And I saw.
Well, we're just grateful you were able to join us at the moment you did. So thank you for having joined us, Doctor. We really appreciate your time, Dr. Irina Scott.
Apologize.
Well,
thanks everybody.
Yep.
Great show, you guys. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for coming on. And we're going to wrap up here. Now, is that the show with Francis? Is that going to be on this week or next Wednesday? Chant.
Oh, that'll be on this week. Thank you,
This
Frank, for
Wednesday. Okay.
asking.
Okay.
With
Got it.
Francis Ridge regarding Madar, and that will be on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Arizona time.
Which is 9 p.m. Eastern time, whatever it is, Pacific time. 9 p.m. Eastern time. Eastern U.S.
That'd be 6 here. 6 in the Pacific.
There you go. There you go. All right. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, folks listening in. And bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.